She paid for a first-class ticket, boarded early, sat quietly in seat 2A, but within minutes, a white man shoved his way into her place, smirking, unbothered, and certain he belonged there more than she did. The crew hesitated. Passengers looked away. And she said nothing, not because she was weak, but because she had seen this before. Who was this woman who didn't shout, who didn't film, who didn't move? Why did the flight suddenly freeze on the tarmac just 5 minutes later? And what happened when the airline's board found out whose seat had been stolen, and whose silence they had underestimated? This is not just a story about a seat. It's a story about power, presence, and what happens when the world assumes you won't speak until you do. Get ready for a journey at 36,000 feet that may shake more than the cabin. Before we dive in, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. This is a story you won't want to miss. What would you do if someone took your seat? Not by mistake, not with an apology, but with entitlement. The kind that doesn't ask, it assumes. Now ask yourself this: what if the people around you saw it happen and did nothing? That's where this begins. Not in shouting, not in protest, but in the space between stillness and storm. It began with a gate. Gate 14 at San Diego International Airport. It was just after 7 p.m., and the terminal lights cast a gentle glow over the polished tile floor. The hum of rolling suitcases, the scent of pretzels and jet fuel, soft boarding announcements overhead. And then there was her. Dr. Ava Monroe stood quietly near the wide windows, her dark wool coat folded neatly over one arm, her carry-on parked at her side like a loyal dog. Her presence didn't announce itself. It settled. She wasn't checking her phone. She wasn't refreshing her email. She was watching the planes, just watching. Flight PH812 to New York. Departure, 8:05 p.m. On time. Her seat, 3A. First class, left window, booked 3 weeks ago, confirmed twice. She glanced at her watch, still 35 minutes until boarding. Good. She liked to be early, not for control, for peace. Ava had learned long ago that peace rarely shows up on time. So she made space for it. A quiet corner seat at the lounge cafe, a steaming cup of chamomile tea. No distractions, no rush, just breath. That's what she needed tonight. Not because she was nervous, but because the morning ahead wasn't just another day. Tomorrow she'd deliver the opening keynote at the National EdTech Summit at Javits Center, a gathering of 6,000 thought leaders, educators, technologists, and policymakers. Ava Monroe was no stranger to rooms like that. At 42, she'd spoken in more cities than she could count, headlined panels, rewritten funding models, and turned her Oakland-based nonprofit, Insight Path, into a national leader in trauma-informed learning tools for underfunded public schools. But this talk felt different. This one was personal, because tomorrow's theme wasn't innovation or metrics or markets. It was resilience, the quiet kind, the kind black girls need just to be heard, let alone seen. Her niece, Maya, had helped her outline the speech last weekend. Maya had been relentless with edits, pushing Ava to lean in, not pull back. You always talk about the work. Maya had said, but people need to hear about the weight. Say what it's like to build something while constantly being told you're too much or not enough. Ava had smiled at that. Maya always said things plainly, and she was usually right. A chime broke the silence. Her phone buzzed with a new message. Maya Monroe. Don't forget your seat. 3A. Confirmed it myself. You need to actually rest on this flight, not outline a grant at 2 a.m. again. Sleep. Ava. Seriously. Ava chuckled under her breath. Maya knew her too well. The last red-eye had left Ava brilliant on stage but wrecked inside. This time she promised herself no proposals, no decks, no rewrites at cruising altitude, just sleep. Maybe. She texted back a thumbs-up emoji, then sipped her tea again. Through the window, another plane taxied slowly along the runway, its lights blinking against the navy blue sky. She thought of her mother in moments like this. Gloria Monroe had never flown on a plane, not once in her life, but she'd raised Ava with stories about the sky. Don't let the world shrink you, baby, she used to say while ironing uniforms for the hospital cafeteria. They'll try to box you in, but you were born with sky in your lungs. Ava never forgot that. She finished her tea, stood slowly, stretched her fingers, and rolled her carry-on toward the gate. At gate 14, the boarding line was already forming. She didn't rush, she didn't jostle to the front. She simply walked, calm and upright, coat over one arm, purse slung neatly over her shoulder. The agent scanned her boarding pass. "Thank you, Dr. Monroe. Enjoy your flight." She nodded in return and stepped into the jet bridge. Warm air, the scent of lemon cleaner, that muted stillness only found on planes before takeoff. It always felt like theater, the hush before a curtain lifts. First-class cabin, 8 seats, soft leather, dimmed lights. She scanned the rows. 1A, 1B, 2A, 2B, 3A. Her seat, the one by the window. Someone was already in it. A man, white, mid-40s, designer blazer, expensive headphones hanging from his neck, long legs stretched out comfortably, one ankle resting over his knee. He was sipping wine. He did not look up. Ava paused. Was she mistaken? She double-checked her boarding pass. 3A, Group 1, confirmed. She took a breath, then stepped closer. Polite, but firm. "Excuse me," she said softly, but clearly. "I believe that's my seat." The man didn't glance her way. He took a slow sip, then flicked his hand vaguely toward the back of the cabin. "Coach is back there," he muttered. That was it. No eye contact, no question, just assumption. Ava blinked. Once, twice. Not from confusion, from familiarity, because she'd been here before. Not this seat, not this flight, but this exact moment, where someone decides you don't belong, not based on reason or fact, but simply because they can. She straightened. There was no anger in her voice, only clarity. "This is seat 3A, she said calmly, raising her phone to show the digital boarding pass. "That's what I paid for." This time, the man looked at her, a brief glance, then a smirk. "Right," he said, thick with sarcasm. "Of course it does." Then he leaned back again, adjusted his cuff, and took another sip of wine. Behind Ava, another passenger cleared their throat. The cabin grew still, a soft shuffle of feet. A flight attendant approached from the galley, young, Latina, eyes flicking from the seat to Ava, unsure. "Is there a problem here?" she asked. Ava turned to her. "Yes," she said quietly. "That's my seat." And so the flight this story began to turn. Not with raised voices, not with shouting, but with presence. And presence, Ava had learned, is sometimes louder than any noise at all. Rosa Delgado hesitated for just a second too long. In airline training, they had told her to act decisively. always smile, always de-escalate, keep things smooth. That was the word they used. Smooth, like turbulence was a PR issue, not an atmospheric one. But standing there now, tray binder tucked under one arm, eyes flicking between the woman with calm fire in her voice and the man who radiated entitlement like a cologne. Rosa felt the training fade into the background. "Is there a problem here?" she had asked. She hadn't expected the answer to come with such stillness. "Yes," the woman said, holding up her phone. "That's my seat." Rosa looked at the screen. Digital boarding pass, seat 3A, first class. No doubt. She turned to the man. "Sir, may I see your boarding pass?" The man didn't move. He waved her off with a sigh. "I fly this route every week," he said flatly. "Same seat. There must be a mistake." It wasn't a shout, but it carried weight. It was practiced. Rosa had heard that tone before. The tone that said rules didn't apply here, that there was a back channel, a wink, a knowing glance somewhere behind the curtain. She hesitated, and in that pause, something shifted. Not loud, not yet, but inside the woman doctor, Ava Monroe, something subtle unspooled. Not anger, not fear. Recognition. She knew this moment. It had another name and another place, a boardroom, a hotel lobby, a taxi line, always a variation of the same sentence. There must be a mistake. Ava had learned long ago that the mistake was never the seat or the system. The mistake was being seen. She took a small step back, not retreating, recentering. Then she opened her phone and typed a message to Maya. "Seat issue. Man refuses to move, staying calm, not escalating, but happening again." She hit send. Her fingers didn't tremble. She wasn't here to create a scene. She was here to fly, to sleep, to deliver a speech that might change policy for underfunded kids in Detroit and Oakland and Kansas City. But even here, 10 minutes before takeoff, her dignity was up for debate. The man in her seat, Jonathan Hayes, shifted again, swirling what was left of his wine. "Seriously," he muttered to no one, "we're going to do this." Another passenger coughed behind Ava. One leaned forward, just slightly. Rosa turned to her earpiece. "Can I get a supervisor in the cabin? Please," she whispered into the mic. "Passenger conflict. First class, 3A. Ava closed her eyes for a breath. Just one. She folded her hands gently in front of her coat. She remembered being 12, standing in the school library. She had chosen a book Thich Nhat Hanh's Pieces Every Step from the shelf, drawn to the title. The librarian, a thin woman with thinning hair and a rigid smile, had taken it from her hands and said, "Sweetheart, are you sure this one isn't too reflective?" Reflective. She had always remembered that word, because it wasn't the word that stung. It was the look that came with it. That same look was on Jonathan's face now. He didn't see her, not really. He saw something in the way. The cabin remained quiet, but it was the thick kind of quiet, the kind that changes people's breathing. Behind the galley curtain, Rosa whispered into the service phone, "We have a conflict in 3A. Female passenger, calm. Male passenger, refusing to move." On the other end, the voice of Purser Marcus Flynn came through, "I'm sending the captain." Ava caught that. She opened her eyes again, then turned slightly, enough to see her reflection in the small curved window of seat 3C. Her face was composed. Her hair, tightly coiled, was pulled into a low bun. Her lips were pressed together not with anger, but with history. She was thinking about what it meant to stay still, about how often that was confused with compliance, about how much discipline it took not to raise your voice. Maya's reply buzzed through. Already alerted, Delta Corporate, don't move, legal on standby, stay in your peace. Ava allowed herself the smallest smile. Maya was 27 but had the tenacity of someone twice her age. She didn't just know how to fight, she knew when to fight. Still, Ava wasn't sure if today was one of those days. Another voice behind her. "Is this really happening?" a man whispered to his partner. "She's not even raising her voice." The woman responded. She just stood there. That, Ava thought, was always the surprise. That silence could be so loud. A flicker of movement at the cabin door. Captain Elena Ruiz stepped into the front cabin, hat tucked under her arm, eyes scanning the space like a general assessing terrain. She didn't speak right away, just nodded to Rosa, then turned to Ava and Jonathan. "I'm Captain Ruiz." "What seems to be the issue here?" Ava lifted her phone. "I'm assigned seat 3A. Captain, this gentleman has refused to move." Jonathan spoke before the captain could reply. "This is ridiculous. I'm a diamond-level flyer. I sit here every Monday. Every time. Never a problem." Captain Ruiz raised a brow. "Let's verify. May I see both of your boarding passes?" Ava handed hers over first. The captain studied the screen, then turned to Jonathan. He paused, then reached slowly into his inner blazer pocket and pulled out his phone. After a few taps, he extended it to her. Ruiz took it. A beat, then two. Finally, she looked up. "Mr. Hayes, you're assigned 5C. Jonathan scoffed. "There's got to be some mistake." "No, sir," the captain said, calm but firm. "That's your seat today. 5C. Seat 3A belongs to Dr. Monroe." He glanced at Ava for the first time, not with apology, with something darker, disdain. Rosa felt it in her chest. "You people are unbelievable," Jonathan muttered under his breath. Ava heard it. Not you, singular, but you people, plural. The phrase always carried a knife. Captain Ruiz held Jonathan's gaze. "Mr. Hayes, you can take your assigned seat, or we will return to the gate." Jonathan stood abruptly, knocking over what was left of his drink. "This is insane," he growled, grabbing his carry-on. "Some of us actually work." No one spoke. Not Rosa. Not the passengers behind them. Not even Ava. She stepped aside as he passed. Then, slowly, she placed her coat in the overhead bin, folded her scarf over her lap, and sat in 3A. No victory smile, just stillness. Captain Ruiz turned to her. "Thank you for your patience, Dr. Monroe." Ava nodded. The captain paused, as if wanting to say more, then disappeared behind the galley curtain. Rosa lingered beside her. "Ma'am, I'm sorry," she said quietly. Ava looked up. Rosa's voice trembled. "I should have said something sooner." Ava nodded once. "It's okay," she said. "I understand." But inside, she didn't. Not fully, because understanding is not the same as accepting. And today, something deeper had cracked. Something far older than a seat. The cabin settled, or at least it pretended to. The final boarding call echoed faintly from the front of the plane. Overhead bins latched shut like exclamation points. The doors were sealed. Passengers reclined or adjusted their belts, the way people do when they want the world to reset and pretend nothing awkward just happened. But tension, Ava knew, did not vanish with a chime or a closed door. It lingered in the still air like static. She adjusted the blanket across her lap and tried to lean back. Her window view offered the glittering lights of the tarmac, runway lines glowing like veins under the jet bridge. A flight attendant, an older man this time, stepped down the aisle offering water. His name tag read Marcus. His demeanor was composed, experienced, but Ava noticed the slight hesitation in his step as he neared her row. "Water, Dr. Monroe?" he asked softly. She gave a small nod. "Thank you." He poured it gently, careful not to spill a drop, as though this cup carried more meaning than it should. Ava accepted it with a nod, and he moved on. Across the aisle, a young couple whispered to each other. She couldn't hear their words, but their eyes flicked toward her and then quickly away. A man in 1D opened his laptop like nothing had occurred. An older woman in 2C glanced back once, then shifted uncomfortably in her seat. Ava sipped her water and kept her gaze on the runway. She knew the feeling well, that sense of occupying a space you've earned, but being asked quietly, indirectly, or explicitly to justify it. The seat was hers, but belonging. That was always more expensive. Her phone buzzed. Maya again. "Is he gone?" Ava typed back, "Yes, back to 5C. Maya's response came fast. "Good. About time someone got told no." Ava smiled faintly, but she didn't feel victorious. She felt tired, a different kind of tired. Not the physical exhaustion from work or travel, but the kind that sat in your bones, the kind you carried through decades of being questioned, side-eyed, dismissed, and doubted. It was the kind of tired her mother had once named as invisible labor, the emotional weight you carry just to get through a day in a world not designed with your comfort in mind. A chime rang through the cabin. The pilot's voice came over the intercom, even and warm. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Elena Ruiz speaking. We've been cleared for takeoff and will be taxiing shortly. Please ensure your seat belts are fastened and all items are stowed." Ava closed her eyes for a moment. She felt the familiar pull as the engines roared. The plane pushed forward, and gravity tried to hold them back. It was a strange irony, she thought, that it always took this much force just to lift off. As the wheels left the ground and the lights of the airport faded below, Ava leaned into the slight hum of the cabin. The moment was oddly quiet, even serene, but her mind refused to settle. She thought of Maya's message, of Rosa's apology, of the way Jonathan had looked at her, not as an equal, but as an inconvenience. She tried to let it go, to press her forehead to the cool glass and pretend the world was 35,000 feet away. But it wasn't. It was right here, in row 3, still hanging in the air like an unfinished sentence. 15 minutes into the flight, Rosa returned to check on her. "Would you like anything to eat, Dr. Monroe?" Ava looked up. She considered declining, but something about Rosa's tone felt tender, human, like this wasn't just part of a checklist. "What are the options?" Ava asked. "We have lemon pepper chicken or mushroom ravioli." "I'll try the ravioli." Rosa nodded and stepped away. Ava opened her tablet and scrolled through her files, half-heartedly reviewing her keynote slides. The opening line stared back at her in bold type. "Education is not about access alone. It is about worth." She stared at that sentence for a long time. Access could be purchased. Worth had to be defended. She didn't know if she wanted to say those words anymore, not because they weren't true, but because the weight of them, tonight, felt too close. Rosa returned with her meal and placed it carefully on the tray table. Then she hesitated again. "Dr. Monroe?" Ava looked up. "I just wanted to say, I'm sorry." Rosa's voice was quiet but clear. "I saw what happened, and I should have said something sooner. I didn't know if it was my place." Ava folded her hands in her lap. "Thank you," she said. "It means something that you're saying it now." Rosa nodded. Her shoulders softened just a little. "Most people would have raised hell," she added. Ava gave her a small, weary smile. "I've spent a lifetime being told not to be too loud. Tonight, I just wanted to get home." Rosa lingered a second longer, then walked away, leaving Ava alone with the quiet. She didn't eat, not right away. Instead, she stared at the silverware, the napkin, the small, sealed cup of water. She thought about how much energy it takes to stay calm, to be polite, to be the one who makes it easier for others to not feel uncomfortable. She had played that role for years, in meetings where her ideas were taken but not credited, at conferences where she was assumed to be the assistant, in cabs where the driver asked if her boss would be joining them. Always the same pause, the same look, the same assumption that she was somewhere she didn't belong. Her thoughts were interrupted by a voice from behind, a soft, older voice. "I saw what happened earlier." Ava turned. An elderly woman in 4A leaned forward. Her eyes were kind, her face lined with years. "You handled it with grace," the woman said, "more than I would have." Ava nodded. "Thank you." The woman paused. "I wish I could say I was surprised." Ava looked down for a moment, then met her gaze. "I'm not surprised either, just disappointed." The woman gave a small, sad smile. "Every time I think we've moved forward. Something like this reminds me we're still circling the same patch of sky." Ava nodded again, and they both fell into a moment of understanding. One born not of shared experience, perhaps, but shared sadness. She turned back to her window. Below them, clouds drifted like folded bed sheets in a pale gray ocean. The sky was dark, but morning was out there somewhere, and Ava knew that before they landed, something else inside her would have to rise too. She didn't know exactly what that meant yet, but she could feel it building. Not rage, not revenge, but readiness. And this time, she would not let silence be the final word. Captain Elena Ruiz ran a smooth flight deck. She didn't like surprises, didn't tolerate assumptions, and made it her quiet mission to ensure that every flight under her command lifted and landed with more grace than the world often offered below. But tonight, there was an unfamiliar tension still humming in the cockpit long after takeoff. She had watched the entire seat incident unfold from just outside the cabin. It wasn't the first time she had seen a passenger act entitled, but something about the way that woman, Dr. Monroe, stood her ground without ever raising her voice had struck Elena in a place she didn't expect. She sat now in the captain's seat at 36,000 feet, running her post-climb systems checks. Yet her mind kept returning to that moment at the front of the plane. The way Rosa had hesitated, the way Jonathan Hayes had smirked, the silence that spread like fog through the rows of passengers. Elena took a breath and tapped the intercom button. Her voice measured. "Flight deck to cabin." "How are we looking back there?" Marcus Flynn answered promptly. His tone always clipped but courteous. "Cabin is secure. No reported issues. Everyone settled for now. First service complete. Thanks, Marcus. I'll touch base again in 20. She clicked off and leaned back, her eyes scanning the horizon beyond the windshield. Miles of stars, a sea of dark sky ahead. In the stillness, her fingers tapped against the throttle handle unconsciously. Something about tonight didn't feel routine. It wasn't mechanical. It was human. Back in 3A, Ava had finally opened her tablet again, but not to review her slides. She had opened a blank page. She wasn't even sure why at first. Maybe to vent, maybe to begin reshaping what her keynote would become. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard for several seconds before finally typing 2 words. It matters. She stared at them, then added more. It matters that I didn't yell. It matters that I wanted to. It matters that I didn't move. That no one asked him to move until a captain had to come forward. That I was expected to wait. That even after the truth was clear, he muttered, "You people," like a curse under his breath. Ava paused. She didn't usually write this way. She was measured, strategic. Her words were polished, designed to land with strength but without bitterness. But tonight felt different. She continued. It matters that a young flight attendant didn't know how to respond. That she looked at me like a question she wasn't trained to answer. That this wasn't about one seat or one man or one moment. This was about weight, the kind that never checks a bag, but always boards early. Across the aisle. Vivian Ashcroft had dozed off with her book resting against her chest. The glow of the cabin lights cast gentle shadows along the rows, softening the mood but not erasing what had passed. Just behind Ava, in 4C. Jonathan Hayes stirred in his sleep, shifting uncomfortably in his assigned seat. A half-empty whiskey mini bottle rolled off his tray and into the aisle with a soft clink. Rosa spotted it from the galley. She bent to retrieve it, then paused. Eyes meeting Ava's for just a moment, they exchanged a look. Not judgment, understanding. She turned and returned to her station, careful to tread softly. In the flight deck, Captain Ruiz opened her secure tablet to review the passenger log. As part of protocol, she skimmed over incident reports. There was none yet logged from tonight. She clicked into Jonathan Hayes's profile, frequent flyer, platinum status, several flagged interactions. One note caught her eye: gate dispute, JFK, February 2023. Reported verbal escalation with gate crew over upgrade denial. She sighed and leaned back, letting the information settle. She had flown hundreds of routes in her 15-year career, but what stood out to her most weren't the technical challenges or weather diversions. It was the people who carried entitlement on board like a carry-on they refused to stow. Elena tapped into the comms again. "Marcus, what's the mood in the front cabin?" There was a pause, then the reply. "Quiet. A little tense. Rosa's keeping it steady. Dr. Monroe hasn't asked for anything since dinner. No further issues from Hayes. Good. Let's keep it that way. Copy that." Elena paused a moment longer, then clicked open a confidential message thread to airline operations. She hesitated before typing. In-flight conduct concern Jonathan Hayes. PH812. Recommend follow-up and flag for incident review. Cabin witness accounts may be necessary. She didn't send it yet. She just saved it to draft. Ava, meanwhile, had scrolled through her document and added more. She wasn't sure if these words were for her keynote or just for herself. She wrote about her mother again, about how Gloria used to say that dignity doesn't shout. It stands. She wrote about the difference between being quiet and being silenced, about how people confuse grace with submission, how they expect your calmness to mean they didn't wound you. She wrote about the moment Rosa had looked at her and apologized, and how that small gesture had meant more than 100 empty apologies from CEOs after incidents gone viral. She wrote about Maya, too. How proud she was of her niece's fire, and how tired she was of needing it. A ding broke her concentration. It wasn't from her phone. It was a call light, pressed from one row back. Marcus walked briskly to 5C. Jonathan had apparently awakened. His hair was tousled, his blazer rumpled. He was frowning. "I didn't get the chicken," he said gruffly. "Everyone around me got something. We offered during meal service, sir. You were asleep." He blinked. "I want something now. Let me check what's left, sir." Rosa glanced at Ava on her way to the galley. They passed each other in the aisle, and Rosa shook her head very slightly, as if to say it never stops. Ava returned her gaze to the screen. The cursor blinked. A flash of turbulence jostled the cabin. Nothing dangerous, but enough to make cups rattle and shoulders shift. Captain Ruiz's voice came over the intercom. "Calm as ever. We're experiencing some mild chop ahead. Folks, please keep seatbelts fastened. Nothing to worry about." Ava looked out the window again. Dark clouds loomed on the right side, wispy but growing. It felt like a metaphor, or maybe it was just weather. Either way. She stayed seated. She finished her page with one last line. Tonight wasn't about a seat. It was about a line being drawn, and I stayed on it. The turbulence passed, but the mood inside the plane did not settle. There are moments on a flight when the world inside the cabin feels like its own ecosystem. Time bends, thoughts sharpen, strangers become mirrors. That night, somewhere over Nebraska, the air inside Flight PH812 was heavier than altitude alone could explain. Ava sat with her tray cleared, tablet tucked away. Her eyes remained open, but she wasn't looking at anything in particular. Her hands rested in her lap. Her breathing had slowed. To an outside observer, she might have looked calm, but inside, her thoughts were threading faster than she could keep up with. She was thinking about all the ways people had learned to look away. It happened every time. In board meetings, when a colleague interrupted her mid-sentence. In elevators, when executives mistook her for someone's assistant. In hotel lobbies, when she arrived first. Yet the check-in clerk spoke to the white man behind her. And now, here, at 36,000 feet, in a seat she paid for, surrounded by passengers who had seen everything and said nothing. She wasn't angry, not exactly, but she was awake, in a way she hadn't felt in weeks. The tap of a gentle hand pulled her from thought. Vivian, the older woman from 4A, was standing in the aisle next to her now, a bit wobbly on her feet but determined. "May I sit?" she asked quietly, motioning toward the empty seat beside Ava. Ava nodded once. Vivian lowered herself carefully into 3B, the seat that Jonathan had refused to move from earlier. "I don't mean to intrude," she said, "but I've been thinking about it for the last hour, and I just need to tell you, what happened wasn't right, and I should have spoken up. I'm sorry I didn't." Ava looked at her. Vivian's eyes were steady, tired, but honest. "Thank you," Ava said softly. "I watched the whole thing." Vivian continued. "The way he dismissed you, the way that flight attendant hesitated, and all of us just stayed quiet. I think we were afraid to make it worse, but silence never makes it better." "Does it?" Ava sighed, then shook her head gently. "It rarely does." Vivian's voice lowered. "I was a school principal for 20 years. Saw more than my share of bias, sometimes from the kids, sometimes from the staff, sometimes from myself. And I'm ashamed to admit how many times I thought staying calm meant staying neutral. Ava studied her. "But you're here now," she said. "That means something." Vivian gave a sad smile. "Maybe. But I wonder how many more times people like you have to carry the moment alone before the rest of us stop being bystanders." Ava exhaled through her nose. "That's the part that wears you down," she said. "Not just the offense, but the weight of always being the one to name it." They sat in silence for a few moments, just the soft hum of the engine and the occasional clink of silverware as someone behind them stirred their tea. Vivian stood again, holding the seat for balance. "Thank you for your patience, Dr. Monroe. I mean it." She returned to 4A, leaving Ava alone again, but not entirely. Because in that moment, something shifted. It wasn't closure, but it was witness. Someone had seen her, not just the incident, her, and that mattered more than she expected. Rosa peeked around the galley curtain, catching Ava's eye. She didn't speak, just nodded. Ava returned the nod. The flight continued quietly for a while. Most of the cabin dimmed their lights. A few passengers watched movies or scrolled through their phones. Others, like Ava, simply stared forward into the hush. But then, somewhere over Ohio, just as the cabin lights were lowered for sleep, the second moment arrived. A voice, not raised, but loud enough to carry, "I'm not moving my bag. Find somewhere else for it." Ava looked up. The voice belonged to Jonathan Hayes. Again. He had stood up, retrieving something from the overhead bin, and was now refusing to adjust his bag so that another passenger could store theirs. A middle-aged black man, maybe mid-50s, salt and pepper hair. Sharp navy blazer, stood in the aisle holding a laptop case and trying not to escalate. "Sir, I'm just trying to place my bag above my seat," the man said calmly. "This is 6A. "Then check it," Jonathan snapped. "It's not my problem you're late boarding." Ava felt her heart thump harder. She leaned slightly forward. The man glanced at Rosa, who had approached from the galley. "Is there an issue here?" she asked gently. Jonathan scoffed. "Yeah, there's an issue. People trying to take over space they didn't earn." The words hung in the air like smoke. Rosa's face tensed. "Sir, this passenger is in his assigned seat. He has every right to store his bag." Jonathan shook his head. "Whatever. This whole flight's gone to hell." He sat back down with a heavy thud, crossing his arms. The man in 6A thanked Rosa quietly and placed his bag above. Ava watched Rosa take a breath before turning back to the galley. She looked more tired now, a new kind of tired, the kind that comes from being pulled between politeness and principle. Back in the cockpit, Captain Ruiz had heard the exchange through the intercom loop. She muted the feed and sat still for a moment. Then she picked up the internal line again. "Marcus, monitor 5C closely. I want a full report after landing." "Copy." Marcus replied, "We've had 2 separate complaints now." Captain Ruiz clicked the screen again. Her draft message to airline operations still sat unsent. She read it over one more time, then added to it. "Second disruption involving same passenger. Racially coded language observed by multiple witnesses. Cabin tension escalating. Captain's recommendation Hayes be placed under conduct review. Incident log requested." This time, she hit send in 3A. Ava closed her eyes again. She felt the rumble of the engine, the thin warmth of the blanket over her legs, the tightness in her chest slowly loosening. It wasn't over, but something had turned, not because she had demanded it, but because presence speaks, and truth echoes, even in silence. There's a kind of silence that feels earned, not the kind born from fear or discomfort, but the kind that follows choice, intention, presence. That was the silence in the cabin now. After Jonathan's second outburst, things didn't escalate, but they didn't settle either. A current ran under the hum of the engines, subtle but strong. Passengers were quieter than usual, movement slower, conversation sparse. Ava remained in her seat, eyes open, thoughts steady. Her body had not moved much in the last hour, yet inside she felt like she had climbed something steep. She glanced to her right. Vivian had returned to her book but occasionally glanced over, as if to check that Ava was still all right. Across the aisle, the man from 6A leaned back with his arms crossed, but Ava noticed how his shoulders were slightly hunched, a familiar posture of composure under pressure. It was always this way. When one incident occurred, another usually followed. When one person was emboldened to act out, others watched to see what would be tolerated. But something about this flight felt different, not because of what was said, but because people had begun to pay attention. Rosa walked through the aisle again, checking belts, refilling water, moving with a kind of gentle resolve Ava hadn't seen in her before. Not rushed, not timid, just present. As she passed 3A, she slowed briefly. "I logged both incidents," she said softly, and the captain followed up with operations. "You won't have to carry this alone when we land." Ava looked at her. "Thank you, Rosa." The flight attendant smiled, then moved on. It wasn't just the words, it was the tone. The way Rosa had said, "Carry this," like it was more than luggage, more than a passenger report, like it was weight shared between them now. The cabin lights dimmed further as they entered the final third of the flight. Outside, only streaks of faint moonlight bounced off the wings. Ava pressed her fingers gently to her temple. A low ache had started behind her eyes, not from stress exactly, but from restraint. She didn't cry, didn't sigh, didn't write more. She just breathed. The seat beneath her felt like it was no longer about comfort. It had become a symbol, and that realization made her sit even taller. In the cockpit, Captain Ruiz prepared for descent protocols. She reviewed airspace ahead, noted updated wind conditions over Boston, and signed off a request for ground escort at Gate 22 upon arrival. Not for security, for accountability. She had included Hayes's name in the alert, not because he posed a threat in the traditional sense, but because behavior, left unchecked, always grows bolder. Elena had seen it before, and she wasn't going to let this one slip through like a smudge in the flight log. Back in 3A, Ava reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a small photo. She always traveled with it, though rarely looked at it mid-flight. It was a worn snapshot of her mother, Gloria, taken in 1986, standing in front of a chalkboard covered in algebra equations. She had been the only black woman math teacher in her school for nearly 2 decades. Ava stared at the photo for a while, then whispered, soft as a breath, "You would have handled it with grace, too." She tucked it back into her pocket. Moments later, her phone buzzed in her lap. Another message from Maya. "Just saw the update from Delta. They flagged the incident. I don't know what you said, Auntie, but something moved." Ava typed back, "I didn't say much, just stayed." There was a pause, then another message. "That's what power looks like." Ava didn't respond right away. She let the words sit there. It wasn't how she often thought of herself. Power wasn't how she walked into rooms or onto stages. She didn't demand attention. She earned it, word by word, act by act. But maybe that was the point. Power wasn't always noise. Sometimes it was the refusal to shrink. A chime came through the cabin. Marcus's voice followed over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we'll begin our initial descent into Boston shortly. Please return to your seats and fasten your seat belts. Cabin lights will be dimmed. Flight attendants will do a final check." Rosa moved down the aisle again, this time checking trays, screens, and belts. When she reached 5C, Ava noticed her pause slightly longer than usual. Jonathan was reclined, eyes half open, the defiance still lingering in his posture. "Your seat belt, sir," he grumbled, fumbling for the strap. "Satisfied?" Rosa stepped forward. She reached Ava's row, nodded gently, and continued. Ava sat still, the straps already secure across her lap. The descent began smoothly. Outside, the dark sky slowly gave way to faint signs of land below. City grids blinked beneath clouds, and the coast curved inward, pulling Boston into view. In those final 20 minutes, Ava thought not of confrontation, but of follow-through. What would come next? Would this become a headline? Would it be quietly filed and forgotten? Would her silence be interpreted as patience? Would Jonathan's behavior be brushed off as exhaustion or stress? She didn't know. But she did know she was done being graceful in ways that only served other people's comfort. Not angry, just done. The wheels touched down with a soft thud. A few passengers clapped, but it felt scattered, forced. The plane taxied to the gate in silence. As the chime sounded and seat belts clicked open, people stood slowly, some stretching, others immediately reaching for overhead bins. But Ava remained seated. Rosa appeared at the front of the cabin, speaking quietly with Marcus. Then both glanced toward 3A, and Rosa stepped forward. "Dr. Monroe, we've been asked to have you wait in your seat. Someone from airport operations is boarding to speak with you." Ava raised a brow. "Am I being detained?" "No, ma'am, not at all. It's procedural. They also want to speak with Mr. Hayes separately." Ava nodded once. She waited. As the aisle cleared, a quiet hush settled over the remaining passengers. Vivian stood near the front, hand on her carry-on, and looked back once more at Ava. She gave a single nod, a thank you, a witness. Then she exited. Jonathan tried to follow but was asked to wait by Marcus. "What is this, a lecture?" He chuckled, then stopped when he realized no one else was laughing. Minutes later, 2 representatives from Delta's operations team boarded. One approached Ava, a clipboard in hand, expression neutral but firm. "Dr. Monroe, I'm Dana Ellis. Thank you for your patience. We'd like to get a brief statement from you, and then we'll offer you an escorted walk through the terminal. Mr. Hayes will be processed separately." Ava stood. "Of course," she said, and with that, she stepped into the aisle, not just as a passenger, but as someone who had held her ground in the quietest storm. The air outside the cabin felt different, denser somehow. As Ava stepped off the plane and onto the jet bridge, it was like walking into a space suspended between 2 worlds. Behind her was everything unspoken that had unfolded mid-air. Ahead of her, the clean, polished emptiness of a quiet terminal hallway at 1:37 a.m. Her shoes tapped softly against the floor, each step echoing in the silence. Dana Ellis walked beside her, clipboard in hand but not rushed. There was a tactful quietness to the way Dana moved. She was watching, not managing, listening, not interrogating. They passed through a private corridor that bypassed the main gate area. 2 airport security officers stood at the end, not for enforcement, but privacy. Ava didn't feel threatened. She felt observed. Inside a small side office near Gate 22, the lights were low and the air smelled faintly of industrial cleaner. A coffee machine blinked in the corner, untouched. Dana motioned for Ava to take a seat at a modest table. "We won't keep you long. Dr. Monroe." "I understand it's late." Ava nodded, setting her leather carry-on down beside her. "I appreciate that." Dana sat across from her, folding her hands on the table. "First, I just want to say I'm sorry. What happened on board tonight was unacceptable, and I don't just mean the seat mix-up. I'm referring to the pattern, the tone, the escalation." Ava studied her. There was no script in Dana's voice. "Thank you." Dana pulled out a slim tablet and tapped open a form. "This is just a preliminary statement. It will trigger a full conduct review internally. We'll also follow up by email if you prefer to add anything later." She offered Ava a stylus. Ava took it and paused. "You want a statement," she said softly, "but I'm still deciding what story to tell." Dana tilted her head, listening. "What do you mean?" Ava looked her in the eye. "Do I write what happened to me? Or do I write what everyone else saw but chose not to name? Do I talk about the man who tried to take my seat, or the dozen passengers who watched in silence? Do I include the way the flight attendant froze, or the way Rosa came back later to apologize?" Genuinely, Dana was quiet for a moment. "Tell what matters most to you." Ava nodded and began to write. Her statement wasn't long, but it was honest. She didn't dress it up with corporate phrases or reduce the moment to unfortunate interactions. She named the behavior. She included the tone, the refusal, the insult, and she noted the quiet, deliberate effort she made to stay composed, not out of fear, but principle. She signed her name at the bottom, her handwriting steady. Dana scanned it silently. "Thank you. We'll be following up. Your presence tonight made an impact, whether you meant to or not." Ava stood, picking up her bag. "I didn't plan to make an impact. I just planned to sit in my seat. And yet," Dana said, "here we are." They walked back toward the main terminal together. The place was nearly empty now. The last few late-night flights had landed. Cleaning crews moved quietly between gates. Ava's phone buzzed again. This time it was a message from someone she didn't expect. "Rosa Delgado, thank you for how you carried tonight. I have a lot to think about." Ava paused, then typed back, "So do I." She didn't know what Rosa would do with her reflection, but she hoped it would stick. As she reached the baggage claim, a familiar voice called her name, Auntie Ava. Maya stood near the carousel, wearing an oversized hoodie, eyes puffy but alert. Ava's posture softened at once. "You didn't have to come. Of course I did. I was up anyway." They hugged, tight. Ava let the moment stretch longer than usual. Maya's arms were thin, but her presence always felt full. "You okay?" Maya asked. "I am now." They stepped outside together into the cool night air. A light wind blew across the empty sidewalk, fluttering the edges of Ava's coat. Maya unlocked her car, and they slid inside, the warmth of the heater offering a soft contrast to the sterile chill of the terminal. As they pulled out onto the highway, Maya glanced over, so what happened after he got sent back to coach Ava exhaled. He kept talking, just quieter, But there were witnesses, and this time, people started seeing. Maya nodded, lips pressed tight. Good. There was a pause. I'm proud of you, Auntie. Ava looked out the window at the streetlights racing past. I didn't want to be anyone's lesson. I just wanted to rest. You shouldn't have to choose between dignity and rest. Exactly. They drove in silence for a few minutes. Then Maya asked, "What will you do now?" Ava thought about it. "I'll write. Not just the keynote, but something wider, bigger, something for the people who never speak but always carry." Maya smiled. "You mean people like you?" Ava didn't deny it. She leaned her head back, letting the hum of the tires fill the silence. Tomorrow, the headlines might pick it up, or not. Maybe someone would post a thread. Maybe nothing would go viral. But that didn't matter anymore. What mattered was that someone had drawn a line, and she had refused to step back. Not with anger, not with arrogance, but with presence. Sometimes that's enough to change the weather in a room. Sometimes it changes the system. By the time the sun rose over Boston, the story had already taken flight without her. Ava woke to the sound of her phone vibrating across the nightstand. She opened her eyes slowly, blinking at the soft morning light filtering through Maya's guest room curtains. There were 14 unread texts, 5 voicemails, 2 missed calls from journalists she didn't recognize. And then there was the link. She hesitated before tapping it. The headline read, "Black Woman CEO Denied First-Class Seat by White Passenger Flight Crew and Airline Now Under Review." Beneath the headline, a grainy photo showed her from the side, seated in 3A. It must have been taken during boarding, her posture upright, her hands folded in her lap, calm. Still, someone on that flight had recorded it. Probably more than one. The post already had over 40,000 shares. Ava sighed, setting the phone down on her lap. She wasn't surprised. She was tired. In the kitchen, she found Maya at the stove flipping pancakes, her hair tied up in a messy bun, earbuds in. She looked up as Ava entered. "It's everywhere," she said, sliding a pancake onto a plate. "I saw. Do you want to say something?" "Not yet. You should eat something at least." Ava took the plate and sat quietly at the kitchen island. For a while, the only sound was the soft crackle of batter on the pan and the occasional vibration from Ava's phone. "You know," Maya said, "someone from college texted me. She said your face is all over her feed. Called you a hero." Ava looked at her. "I didn't do anything heroic. You didn't have to. You just didn't fold. That's the sad part," Ava said, pouring syrup. "The bar is so low it's considered brave to sit where you belong." Maya didn't argue. After breakfast, Ava opened her laptop. Her inbox was flooded. Public relations inquiries, messages from colleagues, a note from the Delta communications team requesting a callback. She skimmed through, pausing at one subject line that stood out. "Internal Inquiry Update, Passenger Conduct Review." It was from Dana Ellis. She clicked. Inside was a formal note confirming the airline's intent to launch a passenger conduct investigation into Jonathan Hayes, citing multiple witness reports and breach of cabin policy. The message was carefully worded, not overly apologetic, but clearly responsive. Beneath it was a second message, more personal. "Ava, I know this wasn't what you asked for, but I want you to know your composure created space for change. Thank you. Dana." Ava stared at the screen. There was something about Dana's words that felt both kind and quietly haunting. She had created space, yes, but at what cost? That afternoon, she stepped outside. The chill had softened into the gentler cold of late winter, where the air didn't bite but still demanded a coat. Ava walked slowly through the neighborhood park, letting her mind breathe. Children played in the distance. An older couple sat on a bench feeding ducks. Everything looked normal, which made the noise in her head feel even louder. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was from someone she hadn't spoken to in months. Warren Adler, former business partner, now a senior executive at another firm. He had attached a clip, a segment from a morning talk show. Two commentators debating the incident. One of them praised her for dignified resistance. The other called it an overreaction to an honest mistake. Ava closed the video halfway through. She knew this would happen. The framing, the parsing, the reframing. She sat on a bench near the water and folded her hands in her lap. What had she expected? That people would suddenly understand the difference between calm and compliance. That someone would finally ask the right question. Not just what happened, but why it keeps happening. She opened a blank document on her phone and began to write again. Not for PR, not for a statement, for herself. They will always ask why you didn't scream, but never why you had to stay silent to be heard. They will praise your patience, while ignoring the history that made you fluent in it. She paused, letting the wind graze her face. Back at Maya's apartment, the doorbell rang just after 3. Maya opened it to find a courier holding a sealed envelope. "For Dr. Monroe," he said. She accepted it, puzzled. Inside was a formal letter from Delta Airlines' executive board. They requested a private meeting, virtual or in person. They referred to it as a conversation, not a disciplinary process, but the wording was careful, the kind reserved for people who mattered. Maya handed the envelope to Ava when she returned. "They're scared," Maya said, or trying to be smart. "Same thing," Ava replied. "Do you want to meet with them?" Ava didn't answer right away. Instead, she walked to the window, watched the street below, the way people moved, unbothered, unaware. She thought about Vivian on the plane, Rosa's quiet apology, the man in 6A who never said a word but stood tall the whole time. She thought about the thousands of people who had watched that video by now. What did they see? A black woman sitting still, or a nation that had learned to ask her to prove she belonged? Maybe both. Maybe that was enough to begin. "Schedule it," she said finally. "Let's hear what they have to say. And then I'll decide what story I want to tell out loud." Ava arrived at the Delta headquarters in Boston just after 10. The building was glass and chrome, like most modern offices, but inside it had the cold, rehearsed stillness of a place where consequences were measured in silence. She had chosen her outfit carefully, not flashy, not casual, a charcoal gray pantsuit with a soft navy blouse and simple gold earrings. The kind of outfit that said you were not here to perform, but neither would you be dismissed. Maya had offered to come with her. Ava declined gently. This part she needed to walk into alone. Dana Ellis met her in the lobby, her face unreadable but professional. "The board is upstairs. They've reserved a private briefing room. Just a few members present in person. The rest are remote." Ava nodded once, and Jonathan. "He's not here. He's been contacted separately." They took a silent elevator ride up to the 12th floor. Dana led her down a narrow hallway with frosted glass doors, stopping outside one labeled Executive Suite 3. When Ava stepped inside, she counted 7 people. 3 were seated at a long rectangular table. 4 more faces appeared on a mounted screen, remote executives watching from their respective cities. The room was sleek, minimalist. Bottled water lined the table. A branded pen sat in front of every seat. A man at the center of the table stood as she entered. "Dr. Monroe, thank you for coming. I'm Daniel Keene, Interim Chief Operations Officer. Please, have a seat." Ava sat opposite him, folding her hands in her lap. Keene wore a navy suit and a careful smile, the kind of expression designed to look warm while giving nothing away. "We know your time is valuable," he began. "I'll speak plainly. What happened aboard Flight PH812 does not reflect the standards of Pacific Horizon Airlines. We are conducting a formal investigation, both into passenger conduct and crew handling." He paused, studying her. "That being said, we want to understand your experience directly, not just what happened, but how it was allowed to happen." Ava raised an eyebrow. "Allowed to happen. That's an interesting phrase." Keene nodded. "We're aware that this wasn't just about a seating error, or even an isolated disrespect. This incident has become—" A flash of hesitation crossed his face. "Symbolic." Ava didn't flinch. "It's only symbolic because people keep pretending it's rare." Keene's jaw tightened slightly. "Would you be willing to walk us through the moments you feel were mishandled?" Ava glanced at the screen, scanning the remote faces. They were mostly white men in their 50s and 60s. One woman, maybe mid-30s, nodded slightly when Ava's eyes met hers. She turned back to Keene. "Let me ask you something first. Of course, if I had shouted, if I had made a scene, demanded that man move, would we be having this meeting right now? Or would I be the one under review for disturbing the flight?" There was silence. Keene opened his mouth, then closed it. "I ask because the people you serve don't just judge your service by what you do. They judge it by who you protect in the process." Keene exhaled slowly. "You're right, and we're trying to reckon with that." Ava leaned forward. "I don't need an apology. I don't need vouchers or upgrades. What I need is for someone in this room to admit that the systems you've built reward silence and punish dignity." One of the men on the screen cleared his throat. "We've begun reviewing crew training protocols, including bias response procedures. That's a start, but culture isn't corrected by slideshows." Another man spoke. "Are you proposing structural reforms?" Ava let that settle before responding. "Not proposing, demanding." Keene folded his hands. "And what would those reforms look like to you?" Ava took a breath. "Start by publishing your internal accountability metrics. How often do complaints come from passengers of color? How are they resolved? Who decides what gets escalated?" Keene nodded and jotted a note. "Continue. Create an independent review panel for incidents involving discrimination. Not just legal counsel. Actual people with experience in equity work." She scanned the room again. "Hire more people who don't look like you, and listen to them when they speak." Keene glanced at his legal advisor, who shifted uncomfortably. "Finally," Ava said, "I want you to make this incident part of your training modules, not anonymously. Use my name." Everyone in the room looked up. "We can certainly consider that," said the woman on the screen. "No," Don't consider it. Do it. She straightened in her chair. I've spent 2 decades teaching teams how to solve complex human problems. What happened to me was simple. A man took what wasn't his, and a system let him keep it because no one wanted to make things messy. Now it's your mess. The room was quiet again. Then Keen spoke. You have every right to be angry. Ava smiled, just a little, but I'm not. That's what terrifies people the most. He gave a small, genuine nod. You'll receive a written confirmation of our follow-up steps within 48 hours. We would also like to extend an invitation for a longer-term consulting role, if you're open to helping guide structural improvements. Ava considered this. Let me see what you actually change first. She stood. Keen offered his hand. She shook it. Firm, professional, not warm, not yet. Dana met her outside the room, her expression unreadable. Well, Dana asked. How did it go? Ava lifted her chin. I think the door's open. The 2 women walked back toward the elevator. For the first time in days, Ava felt her shoulders ease, not because justice had been served, but because the system had looked her in the eye and blinked first. 2 days later, Ava sat on her back porch in Boston, watching the bare tree limbs sway against a pale gray sky. She had made it home, not just physically, but emotionally. But home wasn't the same when the world kept trying to knock on the windows of your peace. Her inbox had become a battlefield. There were requests from talk shows, podcasts, op-eds, invitations to speak at panels. News anchors wanted her to appear on camera. Everyone wanted her version of the story. Except they didn't just want the facts. They wanted a feeling, a quote, a soundbite. Some asked with sincerity, some asked to stir the fire, and some wanted her to confirm what they already believed. Maya stepped out onto the porch and handed her a steaming mug of tea. Chamomile with a hint of honey. Ava accepted it gratefully. Have you decided? Maya asked, sitting beside her. Ava wrapped her hands around the cup, letting the heat seep into her fingers. Not yet. They were quiet for a moment. A single bird flew overhead, cutting a line across the clouds. You don't owe anyone anything, Maya said softly. Not your story, not your energy, not your voice. I know, Ava said, but what if I owe it to myself? Maya looked at her. Then that's a different question. Ava nodded slowly. She thought about the messages she had read over the past 48 hours. Some were kind. Others were brutal. There was one that lingered in her mind. It was from a woman named Lillian, a retired nurse from Georgia. She had written, I've flown for years and always knew better than to sit too tall. When I saw what you endured and how you sat through it, I cried. Not because I was surprised, but because I've spent 60 years pretending I was too tired to care. Thank you for showing the rest of us we're not imagining things. Ava read that message 3 times, not because it was poetic, but because it was real. There was also another message, one that called her a race baiter, told her she was playing the victim, said that Jonathan Hayes had a family and was being dragged unfairly. That message wasn't signed. That one she read once, but she remembered every word. Ava set her mug down and opened her laptop. A blank document stared back at her. She had written plenty of speeches in her life, but this one felt different. She wasn't writing to persuade. She wasn't writing to defend. She was writing to tell the truth, and truth took time. She began typing, not for the media, not for the audience, for herself. On February 12th, I boarded Pacific Horizon Flight 812 with a valid first-class ticket and a simple plan to get home. What I didn't plan for was having to explain, again, that my presence was not a mistake, that my seat did not need defending, that I did not need to be polite to earn peace. She paused, reread the lines, then continued. People have called what happened to me an unfortunate misunderstanding, a minor seating dispute, but it wasn't. It was a reminder of how easily dignity is mistaken for disruption when it comes wrapped in black skin. Maya leaned over, reading silently as Ava typed. "It's not angry," she said, "but it's honest. That's what I want." Ava replied. Later that night, she finalized the statement and sent it to 3 places. The first was her personal blog, a platform she rarely used. The second was to her mailing list, built over years of speaking engagements, and the third was to her team at Insight Path. Because leadership, she believed, should never be silent when it matters most. Within hours, the message spread. People shared it not with applause, but with resonance. No hashtags, no flashy graphics, just the words and the feeling behind them. The next morning, her phone buzzed with a new message. From Rosa Delgado, "I read your post." It said, "I cried twice, once because I saw myself, and once because I realized I didn't say more when it mattered. I want you to know. I filed my own report. I named him. I named me. Thank you for the courage." Ava sat with the message for a long time. She hadn't written for redemption, but it felt like a form of it had arrived anyway. A different kind of justice, not loud, not fast, but deep. Later that day, a journalist called to ask if she would speak at an Equity and Travel Summit in Washington, D.C. "We'd love for you to headline," the woman said. "Your story has moved the industry. CEOs are listening." Ava considered the invitation carefully. She didn't want to become a symbol, but she did want to become a voice that others could locate themselves in. So she said yes, but with one condition. Only if the session includes airline employees, not just executives. "I don't want to speak to a room of people in suits unless the people who serve the drinks and clean the aisles are sitting there too." The woman paused. "We can make that happen." Ava smiled. "Then I'll be there." As the week drew on, Ava began to feel a shift. Not in the world, not yet, but in herself. She had walked through shame without bowing to it. She had told the truth without needing to raise her voice. And, perhaps, most importantly, she had made the choice to speak not because she had to, but because she was ready. Not everyone would agree with her. Not everyone would change. But some would, and sometimes that's enough to begin. The ballroom at the Summit for Equity and Travel was packed with more than 500 attendees. Rows of round tables stretched from wall to wall. Stage lights cast a gentle warmth across the platform where a polished white lectern stood beside 2 armchairs and a low table with water bottles. The atmosphere buzzed with an energy that wasn't quite excitement, but wasn't anxiety either. It was anticipation. Ava stood just outside the ballroom door, behind the curtain, steadying her breath. She was dressed in deep blue, a suit cut clean to her frame, paired with a silk blouse the color of bone. Simple gold studs, no jewelry beyond that. She had her hair pulled back into a low bun. Her presence was not loud, but unmistakable. A staffer from the summit stepped up beside her, earpiece in, clipboard in hand. "You're on in 3 minutes. Dr. Monroe." Ava nodded and looked out over the crowd. She had asked for one specific condition, that the room would not be limited to corporate leadership, and they had delivered. In the fourth row, she spotted a woman in a janitor's uniform, a man in a pilot's jacket, a flight attendant near the wall, standing with arms crossed, attentive but skeptical. She was not here for applause. She was here for truth. The moderator introduced her name and stepped aside. Ava walked to the stage with a calm, deliberate rhythm. Some people clapped, some didn't. She didn't count either. She reached the lectern and waited until the room stilled. "Good morning." Her voice was measured, soft, but unshakable. "When I boarded Pacific Horizon Flight 812, I did so with a valid first-class ticket and the hope of reading a few chapters of a book before landing. What I didn't expect was to become a lesson for strangers or a headline for people I will never meet." She let the sentence rest. What happened on that plane is not rare. What was rare was that someone recorded it. Even rarer, it got noticed. A man took a seat that wasn't his. He did so because he could. A flight attendant hesitated to remove him because she knew what that confrontation would cost. And I sat in my seat, silently, because I knew exactly what would happen if I did more than breathe the wrong way. She paused again, and yet, here we are. Her eyes moved across the room. Some of you are CEOs, some are cleaners, some check bags, some chart flight paths. All of you are part of this ecosystem we call travel. So let me ask you a question. What stories are your policies protecting? A quiet rustle moved through the room, because a policy that defends order without defending justice is not neutrality. It is cowardice in a uniform. She saw the pilot in the third row shift slightly in his chair. "I am not here to be your inspiration. I am not here to be your checkbox or your keynote catharsis. I am here to tell you that silence has never kept anyone safe. It only delays the damage." She turned a page in her notes but didn't look down. The seat I paid for was nearly taken, but what mattered more was who felt entitled to it and who was expected to step aside. When you design systems, when you train your people, when you sell tickets or print boarding passes, remember, this inclusion isn't about comfort. It's about correction. She finished her speech without raising her voice once, and when she stepped back from the lectern, there was a long moment where no one moved. Then the applause came, slow at first, then a wave, not thunderous, not performative, just steady. She took her seat for the follow-up conversation, and the moderator began. "You spoke about policies earlier. What's the one change you would make across the industry if you could?" Ava didn't hesitate. "Make dignity measurable. If your data shows that certain passengers are disproportionately questioned, displaced, or silenced, stop blaming chance. Start addressing bias." The moderator nodded. "One more question. What has surprised you the most since that day on the flight?" Ava looked out over the room. "That people still think this was about a chair." The session ended shortly after. People stood. Some approached quietly, some shook her hand, some just nodded in her direction and left. She was walking toward the side exit when she heard a voice behind her. "Dr. Monroe?" She turned. It was Rosa. She wasn't in uniform, just a plain blouse and slacks. Her hair was tucked back in a braid. "You came," Ava said. "I wasn't sure I should. You didn't need permission." Rosa looked down for a second. "I wanted to tell you something in person. I resigned." Ava blinked. "Because of the report?" "Partly, but mostly because I realized I had learned how to keep things smooth instead of making them right." She exhaled, then added, "I've already applied to a community mediation program. I want to work on the ground, not 35,000 feet in the air." Ava smiled, a softness returning to her eyes. "That takes courage. You gave it to me." "No, I just reminded you it was already there." They hugged, briefly. No one took a photo. No one needed to. Outside, Ava stepped into the cool D.C. sunlight. She didn't know what would happen next. There might be another video, another story, another fire. But for now, something rare had occurred. She had spoken, the system had listened, and someone else had decided to speak, too. That was how change began. Not as an explosion, but as an echo that refused to die. Ava always preferred window seats, not because she liked the view, though she did, but because sitting by the window meant you were allowed to look away, to turn your face from the aisle, from the eyes, from the weight of being watched. That morning, her return flight from Washington, D.C. to Boston was uneventful by most measures. The gate agent didn't hesitate when scanning her boarding pass. No one questioned her name. No one called security. She was simply Dr. Ava Monroe, passenger in 2A. And yet, as she settled into her seat and fastened her belt, her heart whispered a question she wasn't prepared for. What if the peace you earned still feels temporary? The man beside her, a middle-aged teacher from Vermont, gave a polite nod and returned to his crossword. No glances lingered, no posture shifted to suggest discomfort. But Ava still felt it, the residual echo of all the times her presence had been processed as a puzzle, a glitch, or an exception. She closed her eyes and rested her head gently against the window. The flight lifted into the air smoothly. As the plane climbed past the clouds, Ava watched as the world below blurred into shapes too soft to name. Altitude always gave her clarity. At 36,000 feet, everything petty stayed grounded. Up here, the labels couldn't follow. You weren't the CEO, or the story, or the problem. You were just a woman in the sky. The flight attendant approached with a smile and a tray. "Would you like something to drink?" Dr. Monroe Ava looked up, surprised not by the offer, but by the tone. There was no hesitation, no forced friendliness, just genuine service. "Tea, please. No sugar." The attendant nodded and returned a minute later with a porcelain cup and saucer. Not a paper one. Ava thanked her, sipped quietly, and felt the warmth settle in her chest. The smallest gestures, she realized, weren't small at all when you'd once been denied them. She pulled out her notebook, not the laptop, not her phone, just a slim leather-bound journal Maya had gifted her last Christmas. Inside, she began to write, not a post, not a speech, a letter to herself. "Dear Ava, you did not scream, you did not fold, you did not pretend, you simply sat, and when the world called it courage, you knew it was only memory wearing calm like a mask. You are not healed, but you are whole, and that is enough for now." She let the pen linger on the paper. Then, gently, she tore the page out, folded it twice, slipped it into her bag like a map no one else needed to read. A chime sounded overhead. The pilot, a woman's voice, announced the descent. "Thank you for flying with us. We'll be landing shortly in Boston." Ava closed her notebook and looked out the window again. The clouds had parted. The city appeared below, shy and silver in the morning light. Beside her, the man with the crossword cleared his throat. "I hope you don't mind me saying this, but your talk, the summit, it meant a lot." Ava turned toward him, surprised. "You were there." "My daughter's a gate agent. She sent me the live stream, said it made her cry, and that it made her want to stay in the job." Ava felt a warmth rise in her throat. "Thank you for telling me that." He smiled, gentle and quiet. Sometimes it only takes one person not moving to remind everyone else to stand. The plane touched down with a soft shudder, no applause, no announcement, just the wheels against the runway. Ava stood when it was time, retrieved her bag, stepped into the aisle with quiet grace. At the exit, the flight attendant smiled again. "Thank you, Dr. Monroe. Safe travels, this time." Ava nodded. No explanation, no disclaimers, just her name, spoken correctly. She walked through the jet bridge slowly, each step a release. There were no reporters waiting, no camera crews, just the echo of rolling suitcases and the occasional call for connecting flights. She found a quiet bench near the baggage claim and sat for a moment. Breathed. The airport smelled of coffee and tile cleaner. 2 kids nearby argued about who got to push the luggage cart. Life, in all its ordinariness, carried on, and she was grateful for it. Later that evening, back home, Ava lit a candle in the living room. She didn't watch the news. She didn't check her email. She simply opened her windows, let the cool air drift in, and then she did something small. She took out the crumpled boarding pass from Flight 812. She placed it in a small box with other keepsakes, an old concert ticket, a photo of her mother, a pressed flower from a walk in Zurich. Not because she needed to remember the pain, but because even dignity deserved an archive. The doorbell rang. It was Maya, holding a bag of takeout and 2 chocolate chip cookies. "You home for good now?" Ava smiled. "I don't think it works that way, but I'm here." Maya set the food down and hugged her without saying more. The hug said enough. That night, Ava sat on the couch, watching the wind bend the branches outside. And, for the first time in a long while, she felt no need to explain who she was, not to the airline, not to the man, not to the world. She had reclaimed her seat, and, more importantly, she had kept her name. She didn't raise her voice, she didn't make a scene. She simply stayed in her seat. But by the time the flight landed, the entire airline had changed course. Ava Monroe's story isn't just about injustice at 30,000 feet. It's about how systems reward entitlement and punish dignity, until someone refuses to step aside quietly. This story asks us, how many times have we watched bias unfold and done nothing? How many names go unheard because the world refuses to listen unless it's loud? And maybe the most haunting question of all, would this story have ended differently if someone else had been sitting in 2A? If this story stirred something in you, a memory, a truth, a reckoning? Don't let it end here. Like this video. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. And subscribe to our channel for more true, powerful stories that expose the quiet corners of injustice and celebrate the courage it takes just to stay seated. Because sometimes the most revolutionary act is simply not moving. We'll see you in the next flight.